As many new viewers will soon learn, I am on the publishing track from the first book regarding modern masculinity. To write this book, I've needed to research and delve deeper into discourses regarding masculinity. Unfortunately, that discourse is incredibly toxic. When Billie Eilish, in her Vogue 2021 interview, expressed that men are very weak, she said it's very easy for them just to lose it. She became a lightning rod for controversy and backlash. Her exact quote was, "You expect a dude not to grab you if you're wearing that dress. Seriously, you're that weak. Come on." In the context of that, those photos and those comments became the lightning rod for exactly the kind of controversy an opinionated young woman has. How scandalous, a young woman showing skin. Morons like Steven Crowder were quick to jump on her. But Billie Eilish is right. But Billie Eilish is right. Men are very weak. And that's why I began writing my book and making this essay. Men are weak because we made them weak. And that brings me to the thesis. Patriarchy, bad. One of the saddest things about patriarchy is the commodification and control of sex. Sex is feminine. I say so with the utmost respect. Whether it's a frivolous hookup or an intimate soul bonding, sex is the physical manifestation of intimacy, decadence, human connection, and emotion. Those aren't inherently masculine traits. In fact, we associate those with women. Society in which women's status is equal or greater than men tends to be characterized by less conflict, greater social harmony, and higher levels of sexual interaction. Christopher Ryan. Sex is used as a tool in the creation of intimacy. We use it to define relationships, understand people better, and enjoy our time with other people. Sex is the feminine counterpart to the masculine competitive sports. Bonobos, our closest primate ancestors, have the correct understanding for sexuality. In a society where food is abundant, they live a peaceful life where sex is used to communicate and solve conflicts. Their hierarchy, in contrast to the chimpanzee, is very flat and matriarchal. They engage in homosexual sex so frequently they would make Spartans blush. We don't live in the sex-filled world of the bonobos. We live in the sex-filled world of patriarchy, which isn't so hunky-dory. The masculine is great at commodifying resources. It competes, conquers, and controls. A great incentive if you're trying to compete in a business or a competitive setting. Terrible elsewhere. The history of patriarchy and sex is the story of controlling sex. When the Ten Commandments exclaim, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," it says so in the same breath as "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's cattle or land." The implication is that women are property, that they're commodities. And through most of history, as a key example, rapists were required to make amends not to their victims, but to the fathers and husbands of their victims. Many countries still have laws where rapists can get off scot-free by marrying their victims. If women are property, then wronging them isn't the same as wronging a man. Even in more enlightened cultures, women are tightly controlled. Women who exercise their own sexual autonomy are slandered as sluts when they want to enjoy sex, and prudes if they don't. The rule is that women's sexuality is only valuable when there is a man to measure it. Rating women 1 to 10 is a truly strange way of quantifying beauty, something that we acknowledge is inherently subjective in every other context, but we do it anyway. Speculating on their body count, a way to analyze the scarcity of their sexuality on an open market, is both gross and inhuman, but done all the time. If women are inputs in the commodity of sex, they will always be treated as objects of the male gaze. When Billie Eilish pushes back against patriarchy, she's trying to create the space for her to control her own sexuality. She chose to dress conservatively as a child to avoid the sexual predilections of her fans and Drake. The saddest part of patriarchal control of sex is that sex is miserable. Women aren't really happy because they can't enjoy themselves without social backlash, and men are treated poorly if they don't fit the heteronormative ideal. They gain social utility by treating women as objects to signal their own positions in society, And if the man doesn't want to play that game, then he's facing a perpetual uphill social battle. Women aren't really happy. Men aren't happy either. And Billie Eilish is right when she says men are weak. But the story goes far beyond it. She's wrong in how she delivers her message. She ascribes blame when a lot of men are dealt a bad hand by the same social forces keeping her down. The real solution isn't finger pointing at men who can't control their impulses. It's creating spaces where we can have those healthy relationships with those impulses. Men are weak, but we can be so much stronger. And Daniel, I would love your take on this.
I'm curious about like, first of all, something that stuck out to me was like the rating women 1 to 10 thing. So why do you feel like it's gross and inhuman? Because it's something that like I feel like, at least to me, a lot of people do.
So it's not necessarily gross and inhuman. The rating 1 to 10, what is it trying to signify? It is that we're trying to commodify beauty. We're trying to give it a standard, measure it, put it on a marketplace. That's the whole reason why there are websites like Hot or Not, there's Tinder, there's Grindr, all that stuff. It's just us commodifying beauty in the sense that something beautiful there can be like an objective scale that goes 1 to 10. Where in reality, our attraction to different things is like on a spectrum. You can be both attracted to women who have blonde hair and women who have dark hair. And you can be attracted to them both, but it's very difficult to categorically put them in hierarchies because at different points you could feel different levels of attraction. Sex is a very subjective social thing. Quantifying it in an objective, almost scientific way,
But I
pseudoscientific,
feel
if
like
you will, it honestly
at
doesn't
least
make sense and kind of
like
betrays the purpose of attraction. It's not inhuman in the sense that it's very violent or harmful, though it can be harmful to people's self-confidence. It's inhuman as
I
it betrays
understand
the
that.
very
I
enterprise of
understand
sex
it's
in the
very
first place.
subjective, but I don't think people are trying to like objectively rate. Sometimes you're just like, okay, who is this person to you? Like, like, out, like, I mean, if in math, if something is transitive, like you can give preference to, if something is transitive and complete, and there's like a few like fundamental requirements that I think apply to most ratings, then like it's possible to assign a certain utility to it, aka like a certain number to it. So like if it's if you think person A is more attractive than person B and person B is more attractive than person C, and then that person A is more attractive than person C, then you're actually allowed mathematically to use like a scale, a utility scale. And so like I feel like there's utility in using the scale, like just maybe in your head
So there's a big
or in
so I,
conversation.
So that is true. It is a matter we do sometimes use it. We do sometimes use it as a way to order scale, right? We can order like I find this person more attractive than this person, and we can assign an arbitrary number. The problem is we don't really have standards that are objective or consistent, right? You could be attracted to some. Like I'll give you an example. Two celebrities, they both could be incredibly beautiful women, coveted by all men. You and I could rate them as different numbers. It's subjective to us. But women who share the same characteristics, but for some reason doesn't click with us, maybe they smile in a weird way, maybe they could have other physical characteristics, maybe their social utility is different, maybe they have different personalities. We would find varying levels of attractiveness. We don't have a consistent and set rule. We normally consider that women with smaller noses are more attractive, or less noticeable noses are more attractive. But there are many women who have prominent noses and they're still very attractive. So it's very difficult for us to quantify objective standards, but the very fact that we
But I feel
try
like
very
people who
hard
do
to
this,
is
and like
in the process of
honestly,
commodifying sex.
I sometimes do it with my friends just like for fun. It's not like serious at all. It's literally just like joking, like oh, blah blah blah. And also like I think the word objective is kind of
Yeah.
tricky because it's not like there's like objective attractiveness obviously because like depending on who you are, like if I was a snake I would not find humans attractive. I'd find snakes attractive and we don't find snakes attractive, so obviously it's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I think sometimes what we mean by objective is what we
Mm-hmm.
what we estimate is the average level of attractiveness in the eyes of like the human population. So it's that there is objectiveness in that, I guess.
Yeah, that reaches. Mm-hmm. Well, so that's an attempt at being objective, but
Yeah,
I would argue that we don't really need to be objective when it comes to beauty,
yeah, I agree. I mean,
right? There's no point in being objective to beauty. It's an exercise in futility. Likewise, rating women 1 to 10, it can be totally fun. You could do it for frivolous reasons. And it can be completely harmful. The problem isn't, oh, you rated women 1 to 10. It's that rating women 1 to 10 is part of a larger problem, larger narrative of the commodification of sex. You aren't guilty of mass egregious crimes against women by rating them 1 to 10.
could
But
you
it's just
expand
the
on that?
same
That's
line of
actually a very
thinking
interesting point.
extrapolated leads to a lot of the control of women. So I'll give you an example, right? When we talk about sex, especially when it comes to women, let's take Marilyn Monroe. She was very popular, but she was almost always viewed as a sex object. Every man would covet her. And the fact is, she was valuable not because she could express her own sexuality, not because she chose to. That sexuality was orchestrated. If you watch The Boys like I told you to, there'd be an awesome example I could pull from there. But in general, we see this in media, right? There's a common criticism that a lot of conservative women have towards media is that, oh, if women just flaunt their sexuality, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're empowered. They're objectifying themselves, which is exactly what we should be trying to do. When women have control over their own agency, how they're perceived sexually, whether they want to be modest and demure, or whether they want to be extravagant and sexual, that should be in the power, that should be in their hands. That sexuality should be a
Yeah,
part of
I mean, I
agency,
agree with
not
that, but
necessarily a
like, what do you mean by
commodity.
commodity?
Does that make
I
sense?
feel like I don't understand how that applies here.
So,
Interesting.
so the commodity, I'm using a bit more of a Marxist understanding of commodity, but commodity is that sex is a resource. It is a tool for social utility, right? If I can brag, oh, I had sex with this hot model, right? That provides me some social utility. I get some notoriety in society, blah, blah, blah. Those things are valuable. And sex sells. You can use sex to market to people, right? Sex has an inherent value in
Trade?
society because we have allowed it to be commodified. It's something
Oh,
that we
okay.
can trade. And because, yeah, so we use sex as a tool of measurement. So it's essentially
But
a
how
tool
is
of
this a
trade. I was like,
commodity? It
oh,
seems sort
I
of
had
just like
sex
a
with her. I'm more
signaling, like
popular
of
than you.
status.
Oh, you had sex with her. Oh, that's interesting. And then, yeah, so I would argue that anything that can signal status can become a commodity, right? We understand that gold is used for electronic manufacturing. It's a vital resource. But at the same time, we use it to display wealth and opulence. It has a dual function. It has some
Yeah,
utility
but like
directly to us that's
the
a
the
material
fundamental
benefit, but there's
the
also a
fundamental
social utility in having
essence
like
of
a
a
golden
commodity is
toilet,
that it can be traded. So how can
right?
sex be traded on a market? That's what I don't understand.
Oh, we trade sex all the time, whether we're talking about in advertising, whether we're talking about in media, pornography. The next topic I'm going to talk about is definitely going to be in the commodification of sex, prostitution. Uh, we have different ways of commodifying sex, right? Even for example, like I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
heard that, oh, you have to spend so much money on a woman, you have to take her out, and then you have to impress her, and then afterwards she might have sex with you. There's a weird type of transaction, pseudo transaction that's going there. The expectation of patriarchy is that women are almost like cattle. They're a commodity. You need to take care of them, you need to treat them well, and then you can reap the reward, which is sex.
It's
And if
okay.
you don't treat her well, she'll find someone
Like
else,
you
and then
obviously
the
have
cycle
to,
continues.
like you said,
So that's what I mean by the commodification of sex. Sex is a
treat a
tool.
woman a certain way. Like obviously she won't like you otherwise. So like I feel like that's pretty inherent. And so what's wrong with that? That's my question.
In women, if you're a woman, this sucks because you're treated a certain way, privileged or oppressed, because people want to have sex with you. Your boss will treat you in a certain way. Every man you encounter will treat you in a certain way. It's very difficult for you to make friendships
Yeah.
with people who want to fuck you because you don't really know, are they being nice to me because, oh, they think I'm a good person, they value me, or they just want to use me for a night and then leave. Right? It's not good for interpersonal relationships. And on top of that, it makes
Mm-hmm.
sex very restrictive. Right? If sex is a commodity, it's like, okay, uh, people who want to try alternative ways of sex, alternative lifestyles, for them, they just don't fit in that model. Uh, like our biggest insult for men in polyamorous relationships is that, oh, they're cucks because someone else has sex with their wives, as though that's something weird. Throughout most of human history, sex was very liberated. Uh, Christopher Ryan in Sex at Dawn even writes that for the most part, we would have sex with different people, different times. We'd have different partners, and oftentimes people would share, just as they would share houses, they would share land, they would share partners, and we lived in very sexual communities, and we engaged in different types of sexual activities for pleasure, also for communication. Right now, if we restrict sex to like, oh, a monogamous relationship, one person has control, the other person doesn't, or sex is some sort of commodity that's traded, and you're in this tightly knit hierarchy, you don't get those freedoms. And for a lot of people, it causes a lot of sadness and
Okay,
loneliness.
very interesting because on
And
one
sex
hand
is
I
more
see that
commodified now than ever before. Not in a
you're sort of
strict way where
promoting
women
this
are
idea
expressly
of
property,
freedom
but a way
and
the
like,
way that sex is traded back and forth.
there should be more, you know, give and take with relationships and like, more freedoms with polyamory and stuff like that. But at the same time, you're saying that you don't like commodification, which sort of seems like a contradiction because as of now, it seems like the more free we get with sexuality, the more,
Mhm.
games we have to play, like the rise of Tinder, etc., hookup culture. It seems even more commodification, more of a
Okay.
commodification now. And you said that actually. You said it's like getting more and more commodified. So
Well, so the problem isn't that we just, yeah, we're getting more commodified because we're being more sexually open within the context of a patriarchal setting where sex is a commodity. So I would posit a different type of world, one that our far ancestors tried to live, where sex is something that we have a good relationship with. I'll get to this later, but one of the problems is we tell a lot of people sex is taboo, it's adult, it should be kept private, and at the same time, message sex and signal sex in our advertising, in our movies, in our music, everywhere. So you create like this weird doublethink where it's very difficult to understand, okay, like what is sexually appropriate, what is not. We become more sexually liberated, but we only become sexually liberated in a way that's uh, useful for us to signal our power or our triumph, our victory. It becomes it becomes a different mindset to think, okay, sex is just a natural part of being human. I'm just going to have sex. I'm not obsessed with sex. I'm not going to spend hours watching porn because if I'm feeling horny, I can talk to someone, we can communicate and maybe they'll have sex with me. We've created barriers and said, "Oh, trying to get over those barriers is an accomplishment." And we're showing that's our liberation. When in reality, we still have that same terrible relationship with sex where we treat it as a commodity. Ideally, sex just becomes so destigmatized it's like anything else.
okay,
Like,
so
oh,
you
you want to go golfing?
so in
Sure.
your
Oh, you want to have
ideal
sex?
world, you
Sure.
want like
We don't treat it that openly.
basically
And that's the problem.
the sexual liberation that we have now, but
Does that make sense?
to an even greater degree where it becomes so casual that they can like walk up to a girl and be like, "Hey, want to have sex?" Or the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, there are cultures that have done this in the past. In China, there was a culture called the Mitsuo. There were a group of people. They had the same attitudes towards sex as ancient hunter-gatherers. They were actually wiped out by the Han Chinese as they were expanding during the Song Dynasty, I think. because they live sex-free lives, and to the patriarchal Confucian Han Chinese, that was a terrible, terrible sin. It's like, how do you organize a society? They were so terrified of it that when they conquered the land, they just killed everyone. One of the worst ethnic cleansings ever. They destroyed their culture, tried to brainwash them, kind of like what they're doing to the Uyghurs right now.
Wait, so I have a question.
So,
Why do you think this,
yeah.
like, why does the sexual restrictiveness, why is it necessarily patriarchal? Because, it doesn't necessarily just benefit
So,
men.
this has to do with evolutionary goals. In patriarchal societies, at least one of the goals is that you can control your bloodline, right? If you can control your wife's sexuality, how sexual your daughter is, and all the women in your family or all the women you know, that means you can control like your offspring's, your name, your family tradition. The reason why it was so important in both India and China to have a male son is because he would carry the name. He would carry the family bloodline. That need, that intense desire to exert your power over multiple generations, effectively become immortal, that's part of the patriarchy, and that's what creates the incentive structures to control women. In a matriarchal society, people don't really care. The question of paternity isn't, oh, whose blood flows through my veins. The question of paternity is, oh, who was there to raise me? Who was there to take care of me? Who can I call a dad? And we've seen this before. Like Christopher Ryan goes through the evidence about this. Almost across the board, matriarchal societies are more peaceful. Sex is more pleasurable. There's less violence. The only downside of being in a matriarchal society is that if a patriarchal society finds you, because they're much better at war. But people's lives are better when they don't have a patriarchal understanding of sex, where sex is not tied to power. It can't be. That's a problem.
Interesting. Okay. Uh, I'm trying to think of some. It. I can't really explain exactly what problems I have with this line of thinking, but I'm still thinking.
Hey,
Yeah.
we'll get back to it. Maybe next time you can have an entire video dedicated to you just
Okay.
debunking Anirudh. It's like, this man I've known for a long time, but he's a fucking moron. I'm gonna debunk him, and I'd be welcome to it. Again, when I ask the questions of sex, I'm thinking about how do we best understand sex to create a better society. For me, I just really care about how do we become happier, how do we become more free, and so we might be free to sell sex, we might be free to consume sex, but the very action of buying and selling and consuming, that might end
Okay,
up
I
making
actually
us
think I
unfree.
remember what counter arguments I was thinking. So I don't really, well, I can see like how it doesn't actually, well, this freedom of sex doesn't actually necessarily benefit women from an evolutionary
Hmm.
perspective. So obviously, if you're well, if sex is completely free and there's
Hmm.
no societal limitations to having sex,
Well, there would be
yeah,
some ethical ones. Like you can only have
yeah,
sex with people who can
obviously.
consent to it.
This would actually benefit men to some extent. It would benefit the the um the more attractive
It
men
would benefit everyone.
in the sense that like
Well,
if there's no monogamy, then like there's no reason why, for example, like so here's the fundamental difference, I guess, between men and women is that men can
hmm,
impregnate multiple women at the same time,
yeah,
while women can only have a child like once every year or once every 9 months. And so
yeah.
it's more advantageous for a man to spread their sperm, spread their seed, and impregnate like more women than for a woman to, you know, have sex with multiple men because she has to choose like the best man that she can because there's much more incentive for her to maximize this one because she has a limited number of eggs. She has to, raise this child and
Okay.
so how
So
does it okay.
I'm going to push back on this in two ways. One, if you have a tribe where there's only one man and 50 women, and he impregnates all 50 women, the next generation of those tribes, there's going to be a lot of incest. It's not always advantageous for a person to spread their seed widely, because then down the line that'll create genetic problems in their offsprings. I think you can
Yes.
acknowledge that, right? You want more diversity in the gene pool. But second, we don't really want to live on like a appeal to evolutionary advantage because right now we live in a 21st century. The goal isn't to produce more people. No, I don't think that's the goal anymore. I think the goal is to produce the best possible people.
Yeah, but that's
And
not
I
my
I
point
think
though.
this
My
type of
point is
society.
that like the evolutionary advantages or incentives create ingrained motivations in our psychology. And so like
I don't know how powerful those are. Because we have matriarchal societies. And if we even talk about evolutionarily, we are equidistant in terms of the evolutionary tree from chimpanzees, which is a very patriarchal, hierarchical society, and bonobos, which is a matriarchal society. We're equidistant from both of them. And really, what separates them both in their evolutionary line is their abundance of resources, where people don't have to fight over resources and there's an abundance. The bonobos are much more successful, they live happier lives. Chimpanzees, I mean, they live in rougher terrain, they have fewer resources, they have to be more brutal to survive in those conditions. We're humans, we're living in a place where we're soon going to be in a post scarcity, or at least in terms of starvation society. It makes more sense for us to copy, even evolutionarily, the progress of the bonobos because they seem to be happier. And a lot of this is just conditioning. We're taught through patriarchy that a woman's value is X and a man's value is X. That's not something we inherently come up with. We're reinforced through media, through school, through public education, through our parents. Those are ideas that are taught. And I think we can teach better ideas.
yeah, I definitely agree there's like social conditioning to this.
There are cultures where this type of mindset has worked. I mean, they've been wiped out, sadly, and they're not very populous. Uh, but that's because, generally speaking, societies that are very peaceful get destroyed by
Yeah.
societies that are very warlike. So, but we don't want to live in a society that's warlike anymore. We're kind of past that in human evolution.
Yeah.
So, have I opened your mind?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'll have to look. You have to send me some of the uh the stuff on the cultures that were matriarchal and because that's very interesting because it sort of dispels this strict like evolutionary way of thinking.
There's this great quote from the book. Uh, or what's this, what? 10,000 years ago, humans made the jump to agriculture, and we have never recovered since. And I think agriculture, the need to commodify land, to build hierarchies, that was the starting point to starting the patriarchal line of succession. Because who gets the land? People who conquered it. Who will keep the land? The sons of the people who conquered it. So I think we can definitely go deeper into this. I would love to go deeper into it. And I think